everyone, and welcome to our digital short about La Llorona. Today I have two awesome special guests, but let's introduce ourselves. My name is Lesley, and I am the Collections and Archives Manager here at the History Center.
My name is Guada Rodriguez, and I am a media producer here at the Northeast Georgia History Center.
I'm Ruth Moreno, and I am the Gainesville Reads Assistant Program Manager here at the History Center.
So let's start off with looking at the history, and we had Dr. Alexander Wisnoski from University of North Georgia talk about La Llorona and its possible origin. La Llorona, known as the Weeping Woman, the Wailer, the Hungry Woman, and as the Woman in White, is a tale told throughout the Americas. It is likely someone you know was told the story of La Llorona as a kid, as over time it has become a cautionary tale to children. So who is she? Well, it varies. Each country has their own depiction of her. However, over time, historians have come to believe that her origin story comes from the 16th century inside the Florentine Codex. To talk more about the Codex, we turn to Dr. Alexander Wisnoski, professor at the University of North Georgia.
So the Florentine Codex is one of the most significant historical documents from that early colonial period, and it comes about through a very fascinating process. And so for Sahagún, what he does is, one, he sets out to do his best to learn the indigenous languages, and as best we can tell, he becomes fairly fluent in Nahuatl. But he also has sort of a school of students who he had been training in the Catholic faith and in Spanish, and they become what many folks will call informants, but maybe we could also even think of them as co-authors. And so he, in part, is compiling stories from many of these folks, and I think there are dozens, if not more, who are sharing stories from pre-Hispanic times. So it's this massive work, 12 volumes, over 2,000 pages, and takes him decades. Again, all of this in collaboration with these indigenous students and community members, all collaborating. That puts together one of the most important historical documents for that early colonial period. What's fascinating is we can begin to identify some really significant figures throughout history. It's not uncommon for there to be stories within an oral tradition that might also have a script that goes along with it, for those stories to remain in the oral tradition, even as maybe different stories are things that get written down. We even have elements going all the way back to the Florentine Codex of the Weeping Woman, which is sort of this central component. And so there are many who believe that sort of our earliest textual evidence of this figure is traced all the way back to these indigenous co-authors and their incorporation of the Weeping Woman in what became the Florentine Codex. With the Weeping Woman, we have, in certain instances, just a couple of lines and just one, I think maybe two images on which to go on. And so we don't have the full story, which maybe isn't that surprising, as one of these figures whose legacy really is reliant on the oral tradition.
So as we learned about, each culture kind of has their own version of La Llorona. So what did you learn about La Llorona from your family?
Well, it was a story about a lady, and she had children, and she was married at one point, but something happened. And so I don't really remember the full story that my mom told me, but I do know that there were some issues that were happening in her life, and her children either drowned in a river, and she was occupied doing something else, and they passed away. She couldn't save them. She got to them too late, and now she cries for her children. So the story that I know is that she killed herself because her children died and they drowned, and it was an accident. And so she just roams the rivers, any place where there is water, where her children died. She's looking for her children, and those are the weeps that you hear. And that's the story that my mom told me.
And that's the one that I know. Is it the same for you?
It's similar, yeah. It's actually, yeah. With La Llorona, I know that something happened with her husband that left her. he left her, and she's wearing a wedding dress because she's so sad that her husband left her. And in her sadness, she ends up drowning her children because it's just like, you know, she doesn't want to live anymore. She wants this whole family to be destroyed. So, yeah, she drowns her children, and then she kills herself. And of course, she comes back as like a ghost of some sort. And she's near rivers, any water sources. I used to think she was at the back of my house in the little stream. It was terrifying for 9-year-old Ruth. Very terrifying. But she's in her wedding dress. That's one part. I don't know if that's a detail that you remember from what you were
No,
told.
actually, that's different. So
Yeah. Or maybe that was influenced by popular media, but that was always how I imagined her looking if I ever came.
I think she's like that in the movies.
Yeah, and she is like that in the movies. But yeah, she's definitely crying over the children that she drowned, and it was a boy and a girl. I remember that too.
I don't remember.
I remember, yeah, because I'm a girl and I have one brother, and I'm like, oh snap, we definitely fit. We fit the victim pool, and I was very scared, and I hated going to the backyard since then. But yeah, it's very similar, yeah.
So the origin stories are pretty similar, but what did your parents tell you, the cautionary tales? Like, did they intentionally scare you, or was it just something that they learned from their family and just told you?
In my experience, it was a story that got passed down. So it was a case where my grandma told that story to my mom, you know, her daughter, and then she told it to me. So whenever I would stay out too late, I loved playing outside as a child, and you know, I was just playing outside with my friends. The neighbors would even mention her, and you know, my neighbors at the time, I grew up in an apartment, so they were all from the same village that my family was from in Mexico, and so they all knew sort of similar folk tales. And in order to get us to go back inside the house, the son has gone away by this time, so she did not approve of little kids playing outside, especially in the city. So she would just tell us, if you don't go home now, La Llorona is going to come and she is going to get you. I never believed her because there was no water near me. So I just didn't think that it was possible for her to come and get us. But it was still just a little terrifying to think, but
So basically they'd go home or she'll come after you, and as a kid you're like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's one parenting technique.
Yes, it is.
Did that same for you, or?
No, it wasn't my parents that I heard it from, and I don't know if it's because they're from El Salvador, but it's from kids I would hear from and their parents, and they were Mexican. I grew up around that time. I lived in a very Mexican neighborhood, and so the kids, they would talk about it all the time, and my brother and I were like wide-eyed looking like, what's La Llorona? And then when we brought it up to my parents, like my mom, she's just like, it's not real. And then my dad was completely different. He wanted to scare us. And so he's like, oh yeah, I would see it all the time when I was a kid. And he comes after the kids that misbehave. And he would, like, especially he would look at my brother. He's like, and my brother would just look back at him like, oh my gosh, I'm terrified. So me and my brother would just like completely stay very close to the house. We wouldn't go far away with the other kids. And things like that. But yeah, we heard it from our friends, and they would talk about it all the time, because you know, when you're a kid, you talk about the creepy stories that you hear about and your from your parents and stuff.
Yeah.
And the adults would say it too. They're like, La Llorona los va a agarrar. And everybody would be like, ah, like for fun.
Yes.
And my brother and I were just like, what is happening? But yeah, it's amazing how you get to hear it, even here, like in the U.S. in Georgia where we are. It's fascinating. But yeah, it's very, it works on a child.
Yeah, I guess so, because you guys are both so good.
I always try to just do duos as kids.
So it never scared you at any time? Just the story did, but the idea of her coming after you never scared you?
Right. The story did, especially if I was in places where, like if it's dark, or if I would go to Mexico and visit my family there, then it became very real. It was very scary, because my family's from a small village, so there's hardly any street lights. It's, for the most part, once it comes to nighttime, it's pretty dark, and you hear the dogs barking.
That's scary for any kid.
It's scary. So it turned into a different story once I visited my family in Mexico. It became very real.
See, I didn't have anything like that. I was afraid of the stuff, like real stuff. Like, I was terrified of unsolved mysteries. I was genuinely afraid that some robber or something was gonna come into my room, and my mom would go, "Lesley, you're on the 3rd floor. Like, it's not like he's gonna take a ladder and like climb up to your window." And that's what I was afraid of.
That's very legitimate. That is more legitimate than a crying woman coming to knock on your window and shrieking at you, "Mis niños, mis niños." That is way more realistic than La Llorona.
Did your dad ever do that to you? Like the knock on?
The knock? No, he never did it because my mom would definitely get him in trouble. But from there, it would open more conversations about the supernatural stuff that they saw in their country, which was super fascinating to me. Like witches and wizards and like family stories about that stuff. So they definitely, if they don't believe La Llorona is the thing that it is based on what we've heard of, they probably believe it's some kind of demon or something that's like, because supernatural stuff, it's very much alive in Latino culture, more so than the US I've seen. But you didn't have the boogeyman or anything like that? I know it's like
if we did, I don't remember. Did you guys ever see the Ernest movies? I think you're way too young for that. Ernest movies?
I don't think I have.
There's this movie called Ernest Scared Stupid, but there was these things that were like trolls, and they lived in the dark, so I used to jump onto my bed because I was afraid the trolls were gonna get me. And this is like a kid's movie. This wasn't like scary trolls. It was just like a plain old troll. That's the kind of stuff, like my parents didn't tell me any kind of stories. Yeah,
my parents were sort of the same way. It wasn't until I asked. And they very much believed in the devil, but you wouldn't talk about the devil in the house, because you didn't want to invite him. So by talking about him, so it's like the same thing with like the stories. If you talk about it too much, they may appear. You may summon them or something like that, which is very interesting. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.